This is not the kind of show you're going to want to watch with the kids. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, a federal judge, has dismissed criminal charges against two doctors and a host of other people, mostly family members, in Michigan for violating a federal law against female genital mutilation. This is a practice that affects some 200 million women around the world in some 30 countries. It's been a federal law on the books for more than 2 decades, but this is the first time that charges have ever been brought in a female genital mutilation federal case. And last year, the Immigration Custom Enforcement Agency was bragging about the fact that they were bringing this case, and now a federal judge has dismissed it. But the grounds on which they dismissed it are interesting, Bill. But I first just want to get your reaction to the general idea. These doctors are performing this, what most people describe as a fairly horrendous act of mutilation to the genitals of young girls that will make it difficult, unpleasant, even painful for them to do a lot of the normal functions that genitalia are used for, and in the long run actually cause pain during sexual intercourse. A federal judge dismisses the charges. Shouldn't these guys have gone to jail, Bill?
I'll just give you my off the top of my head answer here, Scott. If you want to remain savages, you can be savages someplace else. Okay, this is a civilized society, and we have laws here. And we have laws here that are designed to protect the individual members of the society. And these laws mean that you don't get to go cutting up pieces of your daughter because you have such an ego problem about her perhaps going out and having some kind of an actual emotional life. I understand this is your cultural traditions, and you can take those cultural traditions right back where you came from and stay there. And if at any time in the future you're ready to behave like actual civilized people, we'll review the case. What this reminds me of, presumably, you said Michigan. I'm going to go way out on a limb here, Scott, and presume that this is an Islamic family, Islamic doctors, and that this was all done in accordance with Sharia law. Am I way off the mark on that?
Correct. The word Sharia didn't come up in the news story, but everything else you said, yes.
You can only imagine my surprise. For those people who would say that none of the people watching this, certainly none of the people on our team would say this, but there are people who say, well, who are we to say? It's their own cultural traditions. I'll tell you who we are to say. We are the voice of freedom and individual liberty and civilization. That's who we are to say. That's what gives us the moral authority to say you cannot do that in this country. It's against the law. I don't care what your traditions are. You don't get to bring all of your traditions into the country. And just because it's a tradition of yours doesn't mean it's legal. And it doesn't mean we have to put up with it. They should be in jail. The doctors that committed this especially should be in jail. Do we have a rule of law in this country? I don't know. But when it comes to customs, I am always reminded of the situation that happened in India during the British Raj, where British officer stopped an individual case of sati, which is where when an Indian of some social standing died, it was customary for her wife to throw herself onto the funeral pyre. And the British put a stop to this. They thought it was barbaric. And he was confronted by one of these Brahmins who basically said, well, you don't understand. This business of killing our wives when we die, it's part of our traditions. And the British officer said, well, those are your traditions. Our tradition is to hang people by the neck until they're dead when they murder people. So you have your traditions and we have ours. And I always thought there was a great deal of clarity in that simple and rather brutal statement. And clarity is something we desperately need today. Look, if you're going to, you would think that this whole Sharia thing would sneak in the door in terms of the kind of things that we've heard about in the last 8 or 9 years, where this guy's not going to pick up a passenger. He's an Uber driver. He's not going to pick up a passenger because he's got a dog with him, and it's against the religion. You'd think that this whole thing would try to sneak under the table on those kind of things, and it has been, obviously. But to come right at the, if not the most heinous aspect of that religion, then certainly the second most heinous aspect, first, I would imagine, being throwing acid on your daughter's face or murdering her because she somehow dishonored your family by going out on a date. This kind of barbarism and savagery and 7th century uh, patriarchy and tribalism has no place in this country.
Now let me
And
let me muddy the
if you're not
waters.
capable, if you're not capable of abiding by the laws of this country, and they're clearly not, then you need to remove yourself from the presence of civilized people, go back to where you came from. And while I'm very tempted to send the Marines in to make sure that the daughters over there are not being put through what you want to put them through over here, that's not really my business. But what happens in this country is my business. You should all go to jail, and a team of surgeons should do their very best to see whatever damage they might be able to reverse in this particular case.
Now, I want to introduce a new level of this discussion because I think you'll get broad agreement that people don't think that young girls should be mutilated in this manner. But let me get into a little bit of why the federal judge dismissed the criminal charges specifically, because it's not specifically on the moral question of the procedure itself. Basically,
it should have been.
Yes, and it should be, except that here's what the federal judges said. Basically, he said, this is not within the purview of Congress to legislate. It is local criminal activity that should be regulated by the states. And indeed, some 27 states already have laws banning female genital mutilation. It is also, the judge said, does not fall under the purview of the Commerce Clause, which, as you know, has been used over the past 60 years or so to expand the role of the federal government in so many areas. He said there's nothing commercial or economic about it, even though some of these people were brought in from 2 other states. It's a sticky question when it comes to the law here, Bill. Should conservatives rejoice at the judge's restraint of basically saying this is a state law matter and it's not really for Congress? And if you're not willing to go that far, then why do so many conservatives make the argument that abortion should have been decided at the state level rather than the federal level?
I do rejoice in the judge's ruling, and if that was the basis for his ruling, then I'm in agreement with him. I actually am. If a judge actually said this is beyond the powers granted to me, and it's certainly not granted by the Commerce Clause, I have no business, this particular court has no business ruling on this case, then that certainly not only eliminates that particular judge from any opprobrium I might have had, but actually elevates him into a very rarefied group of people that actually understand principles. So in terms of the dismissal of the case, I'm certainly willing to grant that that was a rare instance of the kind of behavior that I would have expected from all of our judges. But whether or not the law is on a federal level is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that this heinous crime was committed, and these people need to be prosecuted. And I've never understood this idea of hate crimes being different. That if you murder a gay man by dragging him behind a truck, it's worse than murdering a straight man by dragging them behind a truck. I'm an individualist. I believe murder is murder, and you should pay for it. This kind of an assault is especially horrible, I think, because who do you appeal to? You know, when you're attacked by criminals, and you survive the attack, you want to appeal to authority. You want the law to come and rescue you. You want the law to come and punish the perpetrators, and you want some justice done. But in a case like this, where do these young girls go? It's their authority that is not only tolerating it, it's their particular authority that's enforcing it. The law that they are living on, I'll go ahead and do it. The law that they are living under with this barbarism means that they have no recourse. What are they going to do? Are they going to complain to their fathers that somebody that somebody mutilated them during the evening? What is this girl going to do? Is she going to go and ask Dad for help from this? Dad's the one who put her to it. Father's the one that made her do it. And to have the federal government or the state government or the local government or the county government, I don't give a damn what government it is, wherever it happened, whatever the jurisdiction of the law is in the particular geographical spot where it happened, that person needs to be prosecuted, because this girl and other girls should have at least some fundamental belief in the archaic notion that this is a land of law and freedom, and that there is in fact a law to appeal to. She should be able to appeal to a law, and she should also be able to appeal to the law to the degree that in the future, when this happens again, because it's gonna, you would think that future victims of this kind of thing might have the antiquated and somewhat quaint hope that if they disobey their fathers on this, they'll be backed up by the United States Constitution, United States law, and the laws of civilization. It would be nice to set an example that went that way for a change.
The Trump administration found itself in an interesting position here because one of the arguments that the Justice Department made in this case against the defendants was that under Obamacare, the federal government has the right to regulate health care. And so therefore, indeed, the federal government could ban this procedure. And the judge said, this isn't health care. This is a form of physical assault. And if that is, I don't know anything politically about the judge, Bill, but based on what you've heard of those decisions, is this...
He should be on the Supreme Court. I mean that sincerely. The things that are coming out of the mouth of this judge are precisely what I would expect a principled man who understands the structure of this country to say, or her say, whoever the judge happens to be. I think that judge deserves a great deal of credit. And to say that this is a medical practice is to do the same kind of verbal gymnastics that are required to be a progressive in so many cases, where you talk about having higher taxes, then you tell your accountant to get you every deduction you possibly can. If this is health care, and if this is Obamacare, I would think this would be yet another reason why anybody with a conscience and a soul would be dead set against this totalitarian monstrosity. But I'll go one step further and reduce it to the individual level again, Scott. The person that actually committed this procedure was an MD. Is that correct?
It didn't give the exact qualifications of the people who committed. It just called them doctors from Michigan.
Okay. Well, we will just say doctors, and we will assume then that since we're dealing with operation on the human body, that when they say doctor, they mean medical doctor.
And let me clarify one thing, because the Obamacare question, the government wasn't saying that this is something that Obamacare covers, but it was basically using the fact that Obamacare exists, expanding the federal government's authority to regulate healthcare, to basically say, because that's an arena in which the federal government can operate, therefore it's okay for the federal government to ban this procedure.
No, it's an arena the federal government has no business in whatsoever, never has, and never will. And whether or not we're in it now is not a question. The question is, how do we get out of it? But what I was going to say is this. If the person or persons that committed this procedure are medical doctors, not only do they need to go to jail, not only do they need to be stripped of their medical licenses, but they also have to face the reality of being in violation of the entire spirit of medicine as it's understood in the West, among civilized people. I know these are quaint terms that you don't hear very often, but the reason I'm using them is because they're exceedingly useful, because they're accurate. In the West, medicine proceeds from one fundamental assumption, which is the core of the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, do no harm. First, do no harm. The entire philosophical and ethical background, the foundation that allows a person to cut another person up, comes from the core understanding on the part of the guy with the knife that his first requirement morally is to not do any more harm to the person. And this is another violation that these so-called doctors have committed. I'm at a loss of what to say, but I'll tell you one thing. The woman who was mutilated in this fashion deserves some legal protections, and she doesn't seem to be getting them. And when I say legal protections, I don't mean special legal protections. She should have the protection of the law against somebody coming at her with a knife and cutting into her body. You'd think that would be covered under some statute someplace, wouldn't you? That this would be somewhere in the laws of this country. It would be against the law to go and cut pieces of somebody off with a knife. I'm pretty sure that's in there somewhere if you look hard enough.
And just to make a distinction, Bill, there are a lot of people who will then say, well, don't we celebrate and allow male circumcision? Totally different kind of procedure. There's nothing about male circumcision that indicates that it is causing harm to the male. And in fact, it's been approved by many societies for many years as a beneficial procedure, not just on a religious basis, but on a health basis. This is not what we're talking about when it comes to female genital
No, of course not. And again, the kind of person that would make that argument is the kind of person that is so dedicated to making these two societies equal that they will be willing to do anything, including invert the truth and justice and morality and all the rest. A person who wants to make that argument is a person who's saying, well, genital mutilation is okay because we practice it here in the West. And to say that these two procedures are the same is to go through the kind of mental gymnastics that you have to go through to be a progressive these days. I don't have any problem, and I don't think anybody else has a problem. Look, if circumcision was simply a religious practice carried out by Jews, you'd have a little more ground to stand on. But the fact that it's a practice that's a practice that's practiced across a wide part of society is saying that everybody in society pretty much understands that. I know there's some people who are against it, but pretty much understands that at the very least, it is not a procedure designed to deprive you of pleasure at the expense of, Scott, going back to what the British officer said, there were two other British politicians. I want to say it was Gladstone and Disraeli, but I'm not sure. But basically, they were having this argument, and it got more and more down to the how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, kind of down to these minutiae. And one of these British politicians said, "Gentlemen, please, we all know the difference between a live horse and a dead one, so let us pray cease whipping the latter." Yes. Sometimes you just have to just stop back and just say, I know that you're wrong about this. You know that you're wrong about this, and you're wrong about this, and I'm not going to get into the weeds with you on this issue, that you clearly understand, and that you're doing everything in your mortal power to justify an inexcusable moral abhorration.
Even though these are the first set of charges brought under this more than 2-decade-old federal law, they will no doubt not be the last time this comes to our attention, especially in the state of Michigan, where that population that practices such things is growing rapidly. As time goes on, Bill Whittle will be here to comment on the breaking news of the day and to bring it back to principles every time, to bring it back to foundational ideas that have made the difference between civilization and barbarism. If you support these kinds of conversations and want to see them multiply throughout the world, consider becoming a member at BillWhittle.com. It's just $9.95 a month, and you can join the team of people, of citizen producers who are making this show possible. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.